And we're live. All right. So the history hour. It's a running title. We'll see if it sticks or not. But this is episode 7 of the American Revolution, and we are finally going to get into the Battle of New York instead of write it in the title and never really talk about it like last week. So, MC, as usual, go ahead and get us started.
Okay, let's pull up a Google Maps currently of New York. Now, anybody that's been to New York since the beginning of you know in modern times, right? Obviously, New York is considerably different than the way it was back then. So, this, of course, is Long Island. Okay, now the British could have landed anywhere along Long Island,
Wait,
and there's
that can't.
really
I'm sorry, but that can't be Long Island. Climate change tells me that should be ocean right there.
well, it's think of this that this is Long Island. Okay, it still exists. Believe it or not, it still exists. You can see how large it is and so forth. Of course, all of this. If you go to Google Maps, you'll see that it's all heavily urbanized. Right? Yeah, there's some open areas, but for the most part, it's still very urbanized. Now, back at the time frame, though, that we're talking about, there were just a couple of areas. And really, New York is this area here. All right. This is Manhattan. This is New York. All right. The town, basically the Bronx and Manhattan make up New York. All right. There are some, obviously small towns and so forth. Staten Island still exists, but it's really just beachfront property.
Well, so pretty much what you're saying is New York City proper almost looked like the rest of New York State does today, right?
Well, yes, for the most part, very heavily wooded. These areas are not well developed. The well developed areas are in Manhattan and the Bronx. Okay, and of course, this area here. One of the reasons why that is these bays are very protected. Okay, so it makes sense that you would build in the protected areas. All right, from a shipping standpoint. Okay, you don't have to worry about big waves and so forth crashing or big storms coming in that you'll end up, obviously that happens from time to time in these other areas.
That
All right.
that's a good point, and that kind of brought something to the fore of my mind that I haven't thought of before. In this day and age, they are relying on whale oil. With the British and them pretty much stopping all trade, are our domestic whalers still bringing in the whale oil, or does that start to get
Well,
low?
oil is really at this point a very much a luxury. It's not a staple item. It's not used for a whole lot. You got to remember that we're talking backwoods country stuff. Oil is,
No,
yeah,
whale oil. I'm talking about lighting
I
their lanterns.
they use candles. They use tallow. All right, they use a mixture of other things. They don't use oil. Oil lamps are a luxury item. You understand? It's a luxury item.
Okay, so it's not like London where they had actual lamp posts with whale oil in them, and
Yeah, no, yeah, exactly. You're dealing with there might be a few lampposts here and there, but overall, no, that's a luxury item. Now, are our whalers working and so forth? Uh, Obviously, when the fleet decides they're going to clamp down on it, there's no possible way for a whaling ship to actually operate. Um, so, no, there's not any big whaling ships going out at this point. But then again, there's not huge whaling fleets at this point either. All right, in comparison to what you're going to see in 50, 60 years, you're not seeing you're not seeing it yet. Right at this point in time, the colonies, in many ways, when it comes to refined goods, are very, very dependent upon the British Empire, upon the British Isles themselves. And I apologize for that if you hear that bubbling in the background. That is my coffee pot.
That's what I thought it was. Yeah, I wasn't gonna say anything. Speaking of coffee, another interesting tidbit. What they do for coffee then? They just boiled this shit and it was all like grounds floating in it, or what?
Well, you use the old style ground coffee makers. Have you ever seen an old style, the original coffee makers that you put on a fire and stuff? Basically, you have a little cup at the top where you put your grounds in. Where you have your grounds in it, and what happens is you have a small metal tube that goes up from the bottom all the way up, right? Because as water boils, it goes up and it flows, out at the top, and then flows into the grounds, and then it drips into the bottom of the pot, making coffee, and you just let it boil like that. We still have the old style.
Yeah,
In fact, that was the first style coffee maker I remember growing up from my dad. Going hunting.
Yeah, we had one for camping. Not that I drink coffee or anything, but my wife does. I just didn't know if that was invented yet back then.
Oh yeah, they had similar things like that, but they would just, a lot of it would be like you said, though. They would boil it just like they boil tea. You put it in cloth, like a terry cloth, and you dip it inside of the boiling water, and you let it sit there just like tea, and let it boil that way.
Anyway, yeah, back to the actual battle. So where we left it off last week, that noise is insane. Yeah, his coffee will be done soon.
Once again, I apologize for this. Hang on just a second, I'm going to turn this off.
But where we left off last week, the fleet had shown up, and there was, well, I believe hundreds of ships.
Literally hundreds. Literally hundreds of ships. It wasn't a small fleet. They picked up the remnants that had been chased away from Boston, and they brought everybody to go play party. Let's go party down here. Now, when they landed, like I was showing you in this first map, all right, the reality is they could have landed anywhere along here, all right, and then advanced. They could have landed, come up into here, and then gone down, okay. They could have landed in Staten Island, all right, and then proceeded to go into Jersey, all right. Where they landed was totally up to them because they had freedom of movement. The British had freedom of movement. All right, where they chose to land was to put a blocking force on Staten Island, all right, and then land the vast majority of the forces right here, very close, and then begin the battle. Now, once again, as you look at this animated map, one of the things that this is called the Battle for Long Island or the Battle of Brooklyn. Okay, it's the same. If you see it, it's the same battle. This is the first initiated battle. But as you can see where Washington has his forces initially spread out, including a little outpost over here. The reason is because they didn't know where they were going to land. They had no idea where they were going to initially land. And when they landed, they said, okay, their forces are here. Where are they going to come from? Are they going to hit here? Are they going to hit here? The initial push here, all right, if you notice, this is perfectly tactical, all right, for how you did things during the day, at the day. Now, I want you to notice certain things when we come back through here, all right? You send over a force to act like this is where the real force is going to be. You use your cavalry to screen the movement of your main force, and then you take them by surprise in the flank, all right? This is a tactical masterpiece of how you go about attacking an enemy and forcing them out of their strong points. All right. You send your first force here. All right. This was a screening force. Washington rushes his forces to stop them. That's not where the main force is going to come because it's been screened by the cavalry along this line, and then you bring in the main guns.
Where was Washington's scouts, though, after the landing? They should have seen the forces split.
Well, once again, that's what the cavalry prevents that from happening if you don't have enough horses, all right, to be used as scouts. If you don't have a cavalry to act as a scout, how are you going to see this? How are you going to get the information back soon enough?
Yeah, but this isn't the only time this happens in the war. Washington loses more fights than he wins.
Well, he's going to lose a series of these fights right now, right? So this begins the first part. You can see that it's a major disaster. All right, Washington is basically pushed out of Long Island as a result of this, right? And then you end up then where they're concentrated, they're flanked, they're pushed out, and then you end up with, okay, they go to Manhattan. They try once again to set up. Once again, Howe has all the options. He can send his ships. He can send them over here. He can send them up here to the East River. He can send them wherever he wants. Okay. What he does is he decides to say, okay, let's try and capture the troops here, all right, in a movement, all right. And so he sends a movement across here to try and capture and prevent Washington from escaping out. Unfortunately for him, it doesn't work. Washington is able to pull back most of his forces. Now, he's still losing men. The worst part about this is he's losing men in these battles. This is happening. Okay, these are he's dribbling men while Howe, all right, is winning and taking these areas and taking these strategic areas. Once he takes this area over in Manhattan, he basically now has New York City and New York City's harbors. All right, everything is now secure, and he continues to march. And this leads. Go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, but to be fair, I understand that letting them land is usually a bad idea. But if you have no idea where the enemy is going to land to begin with, would it have been more prudent for Washington to pretty much hide out in the city, hide amongst the citizens, and just wait and ambush them as they land and come in?
He told garbage round to fight on too. We're going to talk about that in a minute. All right. The thing is doing something like that sounds really good, but if you tried to hide in New York City and tried to have it out amongst the streets and had street to street, house to house fighting, right? Oh, it would have delayed things, but you would have been utterly destroyed.
And he keeps his army intact. Good point. That's why when I think of stuff like that, I throw it at you and we'll see if it's a good idea or not. Because, I mean, on one hand, you have no clue where the enemy's going to land. You're outnumbered at this point because they're all together. Later in the war, not so much. But right now is the Brits' best time to win the war. They are centralized. They are one giant force.
Which is why I made the comment earlier, right? That Howe made a mistake. Okay, Howe's made great tactical decisions, but he made a poor strategic one. Okay, what he should have attempted to do, right, was throw a few troops here to act as a screening force, landed his troops over here, gone into Newark, right, and tried to trap Washington in New York, where he could have destroyed him. Instead of taking New York right away, he should have delayed, all right, and tried to pin Washington in New York on that island where they couldn't get away. Now that would have required a longer campaign. Work. But go ahead. You know this?
no, finish your thought, because my idea here is completely ridiculous, but I do want to say it.
Okay, so I mean, they could have done this. It would have caused them to actually campaign through this area and this wooded area at the time. All right, it would have delayed their taking of New York. All right, by quite a bit, by at least a month or two. All right, but it would have ensured that they had trapped the Continental Congress's army in New York. All right, at which point, once you had trapped them, then you could sit up there and do that. I mean, with most of Brooklyn, with most of the troops that Washington had over here in Brooklyn, right, which is where he starts all this stuff off. All right, with these troops basically in this area, well, New Jersey's wide open. All right, you can actually go here and then trap them on the islands. Once they're trapped on the islands, they can't go anywhere. Now it's just a matter of, okay, we can win this by piecemeal and slowly bring him to heel whenever we want. That's why I said Howe made a tactical decision here, but a poor strategic one. Tactically, he outmaneuvers Washington here. Tactically, he outmaneuvers Washington here. Now, the reason he outmaneuvers Washington here is Washington sets up in an attempt to defend New York, but he doesn't have the troops, nor does he have the forces to defend all along this line. He just can't do it. He doesn't have the mobility. He doesn't have the number of troops. All right. So when Howe begins to move and take these areas, he has to scramble. And one of the scrambles is he basically goes, okay, at night, I'm going to abandon this area. All right. Leaving Howe kind of surprised because he was going to try and trap him in that part. But Washington escapes, and he escapes into New York and then moves up the Manhattan Island Peninsula.
I have an idea, though. I know this is ridiculous, but I got to. All right. So you split your army if you're Washington, and you send a diversion army to harass Howe. Why you do that after he's unloaded the rest of the army on a bunch of fishing boats, steals all the British ships. Now we have a fleet. Come on, it could have worked.
No.
I told you.
No, it wasn't going to work. You would have got the Americans with fishing boats going up against freaking frigates. You'd have lost your entire army into the ocean. That's not one of your better plans, man. Really not one of your better plans, dude.
You do it at night. You sneak aboard like pirates.
Do you think the British fleet were a bunch of freaking morons?
Do I have to answer that?
Did you really think that Pirates of the Caribbean is a true representation of the British fleets?
Hey, don't you slander Jack Sparrow.
God, man.
No, but Washington does retreat in order, which means they didn't drop their guns and run like the first Battle of Bull Run.
They did drop their guns. All right. Now, initially, where you saw them come up to try and hold that area held, but none of the other areas held at all. All right. So he couldn't pivot to create reinforcements, and they basically ran. The militia ran back into Brooklyn and then across the thing. So yeah, they did drop their guns and run. This is a continually running gun battle.
Yeah, see, I thought they retreated in fair order.
I mean, he kept it from getting too far out of hand. Right? He did save his troops and then move them back. That's true. Right? Washington also is riding up and down the front lines here and is getting shot at. All right? He's receiving he doesn't receive any wounds, but several times his coat is pierced with bullets.
Oh, yeah. Because he was trying to rally his forces. And, yeah. That never goes well for generals, usually.
No, it doesn't go well. Right. So
How
the
many, real quick, because you're going to dive into the rest of the campaign, and then I'm going to stop throwing random shit out there for the most part. But how many generals in the Civil War died because they were rallying their troops? That seems to be a reoccurring event.
well, I
How,
won't say rallying their troops. How many generals die in battle? All right, quite a few. All
yeah,
right.
especially like even Napoleon, Napoleonic Wars. You had the marshals of France. A lot of them died on the battlefield, and they were rallying their troops.
Well, they're moving their troops. They're at the front of the troops. They're leading their troops. I wouldn't say rally, and they are leading their troops the way they need to be led, and they end up getting shot, killed, a lot of times.
But go ahead and continue.
The idea for like I said, Hal here, to try and cross the East River was an attempt to try and capture not just New York, but capture Washington troops in New York to prevent them from getting away. This is a failure. Washington comes up. You end up with the battle then of Harlem Heights. All right, which then leads, of course. Now I'm skipping over several things, but it leads to the Battle of Harlem Heights, and then leads to the Battle of the White Plains, right, where basically the British force the Americans completely out of New York. All right. Now, during this battle, if you take a look at these lines, look at how he has set up his troops. This is a horrible deployment of your troops. I don't understand why you are not putting your troops along these lines here. All right. Moving these guys off of this area here up into here, which would have given you far more support, and you could have taken it to the enemy on a broad, wide plain here, knowing that you had a possibility of interdicting them as they tried to move troops, all right, along this road. This was a bad deployment. This is exactly what Peanwood was talking about. They chose garbage ground to fight on, all right, with too much open space and not enough defensive points. You end up allowing the enemy to come into the same line with you here, because you didn't take these high points, these cliffs, in order to sit there and say, okay, this is where we're going to defend from. Now, part of this, though, quite frankly, is because they're not used to fighting these kinds of battles. They're used to fighting guerrilla-style battles, campaigns against Native Americans. They're not used to fighting stand-up battles with massive troops, which for the Americas, this is massive. All right, on the British online.
Well, yeah.
And the results show. The results are the proof is in the pudding. And they're able basically then to push them completely out of New York. As a final push, you have Fort Washington and Fort Lee, which once again, what you see happening here is you see the British, they're able to land their forces in mass. They're able to begin a bombardment and then take the fort. And then in the north, the same thing happens. Now, Washington is concerned about, obviously, Fort Washington and Fort Lee. Now, the reason that they wanted to do this was to prevent the British from having full access to the Hudson River, which leads all the way up to Ticonderoga in Washington and West Point. They're basically trying to prevent them from utilizing the Hudson River.
Yeah, which they never end up taking Fort Benedict. But hey, at this point in the war, let's be historically accurate. It was Fort Benedict, right?
We will talk about that later.
You don't even want to give him that. Not an inch. Traitor bastard. No.
I will give him his props when he's due, and then I will take them away.
That's fair. But the problem with these forts that I've always noticed, and for some reason we didn't learn our lesson. We did the same thing around the 1850s. We build these forts in tandem where if one falls, it's that much easier to take the other. Why is that?
Well, they're supposed to be used as interlocking fields of fire, so that if one fort is being attacked, the other fort is supposed to be able to, from its position, to defend it. All right.
But it never works out that way.
Well, if the enemy comes in with heavier enough forces, all right, then it can. If you allow them, a fort is a fixed point. If you can maneuver a fort into a bad position, because it can't move. All right, forts are great for a strong point to make it very costly for the enemy to take. But if the enemy is willing to take it and the enemy has the forces to do it, guess what? The forts fall. Good morning, memes, or afternoon, I should say. That's the big thing, and the biggest problem here is both for Fort Washington, but really more for Fort Lee. Washington is under the impression that these strong points are dang near impregnable and can last for long periods of time. They're not. All right, the number of men that get captured at Fort Lee is like 700, 800 men, and yet General Lee had made the comment that he thought he could hold the fort against what? 15,000 British soldiers? Not going to happen. Against the ability of the Navy, right? The British Navy to bombard these forts, not going to happen.
And that's the real problem, right? Is the naval force. We have no way to combat it. I mean, this is the Hudson River. How deep is it? It's fairly deep. I believe a plane fucking landed in it, right?
Yeah. Well, you did have a plane land in it, but a plane landing on top of a river isn't the thing. But for this day, it's more than adequate for the average sailing ship, including the heavy frigates, to sail the river.
Yeah, but can you run traps across the river and try and breach the hull of one of these?
Sure. You can attempt to do that, but only if you control both sides. Because once the other side controls the other side, they can see what you're doing. And they can interdict the traps long before your ships get there. So in order to control the river, you have to control both sides of it. Once you lose one side, it's over.
Yeah, and these were new forts, right?
They were fairly new forts. The construction was not done in the best. Once again, the construction sites that they chose were not really the best to prevent them from being attacked. They were chosen to create strong points to protect the river without regard to how the enemy could maneuver to take the forts.
Okay, so Fort Lee falls first. And yet Fort Washington doesn't get the retreat orders, or what?
Where are you going to go?
Anywhere but right there.
You're kind of stuck. All right. You're not. Where are you going to go? You're going to go in the water. You're going to go. Where? What side of the peninsula are you going to go on? What side of the What side of this are you going to play tag with? All right. Here's Fort Washington right here. All right. Where are you going to go?
So
here's
between the two,
here's Fort Lee. Here's Fort Washington falls first. That's what I thought. I wasn't going to say it. But where are you going to go? All right. So they basically leave, and then they're basically forced deeper into New Jersey.
All right, and as Washington's forced into New Jersey and New York City falls rather quickly, do the citizens even really care? I was under the assumption that New York voted for independence just barely.
Do the citizens even care? Some care, some don't. They're all colonials. All right. New York is one of the major harbors, right, for the colonial cause. They are not happy, all right, with the imposition, all right, of many of the taxes and everything. At the same, and what's more is, one of the things that they're more concerned about is New York is attempting to become the industrial center of the colonies, right? It doesn't have, a lot of the natural woodlands area from that perspective. New York City, we're talking specifically New York City. They are a trading city, always have been because of where they're located. Okay, they can become an industrial center as far as producing things if they're allowed. The British, however, have put a embargo on any kind of machinery like looms or anything else. All right, they put an embargo on there that they can't be traded to New York. All right, which that they chafe at. By the same token, though, they have more regular contact with on a day-to-day basis with the British Empire, with the British Isles. This is where the ships come. This is they're friendly ship. These are friendly ships until the war. They weren't looked upon as the enemy. These are the ships. So it's a transshipment point. All right, it has much tighter ties to the empire in that regard. So it's less patriotic than some of the deeper hinterlands, right? But at the same time, they're not enthralled per se with the British forces. And as was shown on the map, and shown here, right? It's November 20th when Fort Lee falls. Well, what's November?
My birthday is in November.
but it's winter time. Okay.
Oh, so you're saying? So I know what you're saying. Winter is coming.
Winter is coming, right? And the results are now. Howe has a choice to make. Does he try to attempt the campaign in the winter? Okay. These rivers are going to get ice. These rivers are going to start to see ice flows. All right, especially if you go up further north into the hinterlands. All right, these are going to become block points. Okay, he chooses. All right, Howe chooses to say, okay, it's too late to continue doing this. We are going to now winter over in the comforts of New York, in New York proper.
Now, that is something the British do all throughout this war. And I do understand in the time period you would go into winter quarters. I get that. But does that mean you sleep with your officers' wives and you get drunk every day? Didn't one of the British generals have a super high whiskey bill, right?
Okay, but what are you going to do in the winter?
Not sleep with your officers' wives.
Okay. All right.
Do the officers know about this?
Officers were sleeping with other people, don't you think? In fact, they had several mistresses. Howe had several American mistresses.
Yeah, it's like every documentary you see on the History Channel, though. They're like, yeah, and Howell was sleeping with his officer's wife, and then they just keep going. Like it was a normal thing. I'm guessing it was a normal thing, but if you're of the officer class, do you want this to be a normal thing?
You don't sleep with your subordinates' wives. That's a major no-no. All right, but the fact that they had mistresses, that was quite common. All right, for this time frame. The problem with winter, all right, from a military perspective, okay, at this time frame, was you can't get your troops to do anything. All right, it's impossible. Why? Because the weather prevents them from doing things. Okay, the weather prevents them from campaigning. The weather makes movement very difficult. Okay, it increases the cost of logistics. All right, let alone walking your men in frozen conditions and trying to march them. Nobody likes moving in winter. Trust me. And when all you've got to do is the Shoe Leather Express through snow, it sucks. Okay?
Well, absolutely. That leather gets rock hard too, and there's no food to procure along the route. Yeah, I totally understand. But there is another point where the British have been dealing with the Nordic peoples of Europe for how long? Why didn't they learn about snowshoes from Finland? I mean,
It's not. It's not.
don't you think it would be better if while your enemy went in the winter quarters, you went on the march?
Really? You think that's a good idea?
It works for Washington at Trenton.
Well, he doesn't because he fakes the British into thinking he went into winter quarters, and then what happened?
That's fair, but Washington I mean, it wasn't a long campaign, but it was a winter campaign, and he succeeds. Why haven't the European war, why did it not evolve? It evolved so slowly.
Because movement. Okay, look, if you want to talk about the battles in the winter campaigns, we can do that. Let's go on to something else though, because this is also very important. All right, let me bring this back up again, and that's the battle here, Vancouver Island. Now, this is once again an American loss, but it's a tactical victory because once again the Americans are able to delay the British. All right. Now, what has happened? Well, Benedict Arnold, all right, has basically his idea is to try and stop the British from taking the entire Hudson all at once. Okay. And so his idea is we're going to build ships, all right, and then we're going to fight on the water. All right. With his 800 men, he's going to build a bunch of ships, put whatever cannons and so forth he can, and take on the British fleet.
Okay, I was joking. That comment I made earlier, I was kidding, Benedict.
Now, Benedict builds this fleet. You got to give him credit. He builds a number of these ships, and they attempt to interdict the British, and the result is the Americans get blown out of the water. All right, however. And why are they blown out of the water? Well, one of the main reasons they're blown out of the water is they're frankly outgunned. All right, the British have main ships here. They have main frigates. All right, they have heavier guns and more of them to take on the American line. Now, the Americans fight very bravely and actually severely damage several of the capital ships of the British. However, the American ships were built very quickly, and they were built with green lumber. All right, and as a result,
sorry to cut you off, but green lumber, and were they even tarred properly? I mean, how quickly did he build these boats?
He built them very quickly. All right, so they were not what you would call seaworthy in any way, shape, or form. All right, and the result is they're defeated. The British carry the day, but it delays this operation delays the British again. All right, and it basically saves Fort Ticonderoga. All right, for the rest of the year. So the Americans are losing. And they're losing badly. And now, the thing that's really disheartening here is, yeah, they're losing, but they they're so close in so many ways. They got this if they could just keep it together, right? If they could just keep it in the field, all right? They still are. They're losing. These are major losses of men. Now, this goes back to something else that we need to talk about. When the British capture Americans, they see them as traitors, okay? But they don't want to do wholesale executions. You do not want to be known for killing 800, 900 men, all right, at a time, just executing them.
Yeah, the Crusaders would laugh at you, but I do see your point.
Well, this is a different time, and what's more is these are those kind of slaughters are things that are very frowned upon throughout British history when they took place. It's one thing to execute the commander. It's one thing to execute the commanders and the leaders. It's another thing to execute the average person. Okay, and the loss of Americans in that regard would have been wholly devastating. However, the British aren't just releasing them, saying, "Okay, give me your on your honor, you'll never fight us again." They're not releasing them. They're basically keeping them aboard all those empty British ships, and they keep them in basically prison ships.
Well, yeah, and the main problem with that, and I guess since you brought it up, we might as well cover it now. Okay, so the rules of war at the time: when you captured an infantryman or an officer, you could exchange said infantry or said officers, but you could not exchange an officer for infantry. You could not exchange infantry for navy. And that's going to become a big deal as the war drags on, because the Americans are trying their damnedest to put together a navy. And as they keep attempting, they keep getting captured. As they get captured, they stack up in the prison ships where disease spreads. You think COVID's bad? Try being in this prison ship. Okay.
Yeah, prison's bad. The food's bad. They are not. You're kept below decks. All right. This is not a health spa in any way, shape, or form. And these men slowly waste away.
Towards the end of the war, it gets to a point where the British, where before they would come in and go, look, you want out of here? Sign up for the British Navy, guys. And they would all tell them pretty much, go F yourself. As it dragged on, though, Americans would start signing up. And there's a case of, like, the day before the war ended, a bunch of Americans signed. Finally, they broke. And then they're like, wait a minute, what? They ended up going to campaign somewhere else. The war was over.
Well, not for them, it wasn't, because now they had a new war to fight against the French.
But yeah, so the American Navy, they would almost been better off treated as pirates and hung than to sit in those prison ships, in my opinion.
Oh well, perhaps. All right. One of the people that's captured later on is Andrew Jackson. So, there are a number of things that are going on there. But let's now talk about the winter campaign. Okay, the British, when they're told, okay, start forming, let's go into winter forces. The British have a problem. Right? Where do you put all the troops? You can't house all the troops in one area. Right? And so they spread their troops out through different areas. All right, to encamp. Now, the thing about winter time at this time frame is people didn't do things in winter. All right, this is of course when you have balls and you have several things in the urban areas, but for the most part, what are you going to do? You're not farming. All right, you're not going to go out in the woods and build ships. Okay, you're not going to cut lumber the way you were before. You're not building houses. All right. Wintertime is a time where people basically sat, all right, waited for the weather to clear, for the planting to begin. They would repair as much as possible, like they would go out there and fiddle with the fiddle with a fence line maybe here or there, but for the most part they were they would feed their animals, all right, but their animals were now in barns. Okay, you would have to go out there and feed the animals, but aside from that, you didn't do anything.
Yeah, but in winter quarters, as a military force, Washington takes this as time to drill. Remember, he is using a green fighting force. What did they really do besides lose a couple battles and get some guns outside Boston?
He's not doing that yet. All right, the drilling that they're going to talk about is going to come at Valley Forge later on.
I would imagine, though, he was. Oh no, he was still trying to get everything drilled into him as far as latrine duty and all that other crap, right?
Just regular soldiery is becoming difficult, and what's more is as the year begins to go down, he's got a problem. All right, and that is most of his troops, the vast majority, had only signed up for a single years of campaign, and those dates were coming due. All right, and they've had their ass kicked, like you said, right, up and down New York. Okay, he is worried. He is terrified that he is going to lose the army. And so what he does is he decides, okay, I'm going to break military protocol and attack a weak area, all right, for being in New Jersey. So he attacks Trenton. Now, why is he attacking Trenton? He's attacking Trenton for several reasons. One, it's close. He thinks he can get there, all right, and get out before the British can move. That's number one. Number two, he thinks he can surprise the forces, in this case, the Hessian forces. All right. And the reason he thinks that is because the people are in the area much upset with the Hessians and the way the Hessians are acting, because they're acting like, okay, well, we take over an area and we just basically steal everything. All right. There isn't the the rape and the pillaging that people normally associate with this, but there is a bit of pillaging going on, right? The Hessians are, when they take over a household, right, or they take over a quarters, they basically treat it as if it's theirs. Okay, they do steal the silverware, right? Now, and this is precious treasure, all right, that the people have. This is family heirloom kind of stuff that they get really upset with, because this is stuff that's been handed down to them time and time again.
Well, yeah, it's like what? I'm sure people still have it, but I haven't heard of someone getting an antique China set in years. But that was a big thing, right? Like the good China, the real silverware, like it's actually silver, people. Like,
Yeah. And these are in China. China, I can't tell you how prized Chinaware is. Okay, it is a huge issue. It is hugely popular. Okay, Washington. Everyone's seen the pictures of Washington crossing the Delaware. Okay, this was a very hazardous crossing. Washington, when he comes back with this plan, is thinking that they are going to be able to cross the Delaware, all right, very quickly. It takes him twice as long to cross the Delaware than he planned. The boats that he was expecting to be able to find, he is not able to find. All right. He manages to cross the Delaware, all right, without losing any of his troops. And when you see them crossing the Delaware, where they're basically going across, pushing ice floes out of the way, that's what they were doing. These to go across and do that kind of a crossing in the middle of winter, right, at night was unheard of.
well,
Casualties are insignificant, with the exception of a single rifle. They lost a single rifle to the water.
Well, yeah. I believe the first boat that went across tied a line, and they just dragged themselves across for the most part, right?
Nope.
No,
you couldn't do that because of the ice.
Okay.
You get hit with the ice. You can't. You had to go across and then go back and then go across and go back. These guys had to sit up there and literally go across in dinghies. The dinghy had to come back and do it again.
A lot of the troops did not have proper footwear. Socks,
Well, no,
if they had any.
once
Were
again, this is where you do repairing. This is downtime where you repair your footwear. You're in a camp. You repair your footwear. You get your socks. You darn your socks. You fix all.
yeah,
of
but
things.
the problem is though they weren't getting the requisitions.
Well, of course
They were
not.
being sent out, but they weren't getting them.
Well, they didn't exist to a large extent. All right. Logistics for the Continental Congress, or for the Continental Army rather, is very haphazard. You don't have a true quartermaster. All this stuff is being created by Washington, and he assigns a guy who becomes the great quartermaster for the United States, and that is he assigns that to Knox, and Knox is the one who basically puts together on his own the entire quartermaster system. Unfortunately, because he is the quartermaster, he is often able to get supplies that other people have, and as a result, he doesn't suffer the kind of deprivations that the average troops have, which is one of the reasons why they called him fatty.
Well, that usually happens. The quartermasters are the best dressed in the whole entire army.
They're the best dressed and they're the best fed. So,
hey, totally fair, right? There is a story that from my favorite documentary on this that I like. On the march, it was so cold that some people were getting lost in a daze. Early stages of hypothermia, they would fall down and just die, freeze. And this one infantryman, he had fallen down in the snow, and he wrote this in letters, so obviously he survived. A Lieutenant Madden came up and told him to get to his feet, got him up, and made him keep marching. So that's interesting. I doubt I'm related in any way to that person, but it would be kind of cool if I was.
that's very possible, right? They move out. They actually get to Trenton at about 8 o'clock in the morning. All right, hours after.
Oh, you forgot the fog. Didn't a fog set in, and that's what helped him keep the sneak attack going?
Well, the big thing about the sneak attack was the populace basically insulated it. They played the role of the cavalry, all right, and prevented in a lot of ways. There's just a lot of individual anecdotes where some of the Hessians were supposed to be out on patrol and are convinced by the local populace, no, here, have another beer, or here, have another drink. All right, it is Christmas after all, right?
Yeah, drink that eggnog. Good shit, huh?
He attacks, as you can see from the lines of attack here. All right, he basically carries it in two divisions. The first thing that Rao, who is the commander of the Hessians in Trenton, knows about it is when the cannons open fire. All right, he attempts to rally his troops. He attempts to gather the small corps that's around him. This is what you're seeing right here. He goes in an attempt to attack. He is immediately pushed back. They're surrounded, and then he is shot. All right, the Hessians have to surrender. Why was this important? Okay, first of all, it's a victory, number one. Rao, being mortally wounded, stays alive just long enough to basically see Washington and ask for pardon for his men. All right, he is worried that his men are just going to be absolutely slaughtered because he understands the populace is very upset, and he tries to do what he can to shield his men. For the most part, they are just basically stripped of all their arms. But that's the big thing. The stand of arms and the cannon, all right, that fall into the hands of the patriots of the Continental Army, all right, is significant, all right, because it means they can keep them supplied at least with ammo, all right, and some of the other stores that were there, all right. But this was only one part of the attack. Okay. Washington wants to move even more, and he moves over to Princeton and attacks. All right. And he moves on Princeton. Now, they were a little bit more forewarned, but they are outnumbered and outmaneuvered and are forced out of Princeton as well. The British have lose about 7 guns. They are completely forced onto the defensive. The Dragoons are basically shattered and pushed back. These were mainline British forces, and they were defeated. All right. At which point, then the battles were over, and he goes. Washington leaves, all right, and goes into winter quarters. Now, is this a major loss by the British? Not really. All right, these are basically, the British would look at them as spoiling actions, but it stings. It stings how attempts to try and maneuver his forces to capture Washington. All right, but Washington is long gone by the time they get there. Okay, and how it's not a death blow by any stretch of the imagination.
No, what it really is, though, is a kick in the pants to the Americans. Hey, we're not out of this yet.
And it does do what the biggest thing that Washington wants is, it does cause many of his troops, not the majority, but many of his troops immediately sign back up. Okay, and it prevents the entire dissolution of his army. So while the army can be rebuilt now, it's in a position where he still has an army in the field. And
yeah,
this in and of itself is a victory.
Thing is, though, I don't believe he takes those troops back with him. I get it. They don't really have anywhere to put them. I understand.
No, they go back. They actually go to Valley Forge, and they encamp in Valley Forge.
Okay. So he did take the POWs. Good.
He takes them to not Black Valley Forge. Trying to remember. Monmouth. He encamps at Fort Monmouth. All right. He does repatriate the troops, but they're basically stripped of arms, which now the Americans have. And these are thousands of the stand of arms is in the thousands. Okay, so this is a major supply of that and shot and powder, which the Americans throughout the war are short of. The Americans are always short of shot and powder, especially shot, because they haven't developed lead mines and producing their own metal working facilities are not even rudimentary yet at this point. And one thing that you need lead shot. You can't just fire forks out of your barrels of your gun. I know we see some similar things like that in the Civil War, but you don't see it during the during the Revolutionary War.
Well, and the thing is, meanwhile, in Philadelphia, most of the Continental Congress has gone back to their respective homes for the winter, I believe. But they still had to be shocked at how easy it was for New York to fall, right?
Morristown. I wouldn't say that they're surprised. They had expectations of these, fantastical expectations that they would drive the British out, just like they would drive the British were able to drive the British out of Boston. Okay, the idea that they were going to actually be able to do that, though, to be honest, was okay. They beat the British in Boston. They were at a high. All of a sudden, reality now sets in. The British come with a real force to put this down. Now they understand something that's going to be difficult for them to accept, which is major British forces are now being sent. It's not going to be the cakewalk that they thought it was. You're starting to see the full might of the British Empire. And this is something that the colonists, the colonials, never understood in a lot of ways. because they're used to the farmlands. They're used to the people around them. That's what they see. That's what they know. They have not seen, many of them have not seen a real city like London. Okay. Yeah, you talk about Boston. Boston has what, 15, 20,000 people in it at this point? Maybe a bit more. All right. It's not very large. All right. It's not even a freaking hamlet to some of the British, to the actual British cities.
Well, that's what I was going to say. It's not even a village compared to London, right? I mean, and Lord North and the King, are they happy with just the sack of well, it wasn't sacked, it wasn't burnt to the ground. Just the taking of New York? I mean, you would have to think they expected the rebels to be rounded up fairly quickly.
Yeah, that's where they're not very happy with Howe, okay, because they think that Howe he's winning the battle, right? But he's not capturing him. He's not capturing Washington. Washington keeps escaping across the rivers. Washington keeps moving and is still in the field. Okay, yeah, they're victories, but what are you doing with all these men? And then, of course, comes word of Trenton and Princeton, and they're like, "Wait a minute here. This should never have happened. What's going on here? What are you doing, Howe? How are you utilizing these forces?" And like I said, one of the mistakes that Howe has made is he's made a strategic mistake in that he doesn't pin Washington onto those islands. Okay, it wouldn't have been easy to do if Washington was aware of things. He would have obviously made sure that he didn't get pinned like that. But the way he did it, the way that Howe did this, is Howe has the view that these are British subjects that will return to the motherland. All right. He has the philosophy that eventually these are British subjects. All right, and they have to be treated like British subjects. Okay, these are our brothers, these are our sisters, these are people we know. All right, these are people that speak English. All right, this is not the French that we're dealing with. Right, these are not our enemies. They are just, upstarts.
Misguided. That's actually
misguided children. Yes.
And that's the surprising part. They actually thought of us as misguided. They're like, "Oh, the colonists are throwing a hissy fit. We'll send some ships over, put it down, and head back to the Caribbean and make some money." Right?
The thought process initially, right, by Lord North, is that once we send serious forces over to the Americans will surrender. That was a mistake on his part. All right, you were not going to overawe the Americans. You might be able to defeat them on the battle, but once again, that's not how Americans fought. That's not how they had been fighting. That's not their normal style of warfare. Okay, and they are not. This is a problem. Okay, they are not British. They're not British soldiers the way you think of British soldiers are. They will get that way. They will get to that point, right, with the help of the French. All right, but they're not at that point right now. Okay, they're not fighting the way the British normally think of them to fight. Now, there's some battles that are going to come up, okay, and you're going to see major losses by the Americans, okay, but you're also going to see major losses by the British because of the philosophies, all right. And what the British do, though, you got to think about this. The British philosophies is they're also coming about with the mentality of we're going to overawe them. So they send, because Howe hasn't finished off Washington, they send 2 more generals over. All right.
Don't they fire Howe here next year, I believe? I mean, we're jumping forward a little bit, but
well, we are, but the British are making plans to send over some of their some of their quote unquote best and brightest, and it's going to fail. The British have a plan, right? But it's not going to go the way they expect it to go.
Yeah, the Southern strategy. Yeah, thus far and no further. But all right, so we passed the hour mark. We don't have to end it yet. What I do want to discuss is Charlington. Does that name ring a bell? He fights in the Southern
Right, but
strategy.
we're not there. The Northern strategy has yet to unfold. The
I
attempt
know.
in the North has.
I just want to ask though, do you believe the stories that went around that he burnt churches and he was just they kind of based the character in the Patriot after him?
Okay, Bloody Tarleton, yes. All right. Our were atrocities committed by his troops? Let's ask that question first off. The answer is, yeah, there were atrocities that were committed. Were they of the nature that you see being portrayed? To an extent, but the troops, these are troops under, how do I put this? This is normal for warfare. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I just when you're talking about one general though, and this is why I know he was what, a lieutenant general or a cavalry officer, something like that.
He was one of the cavalry officers. He was not one of the big ones. Okay.
Yeah, but when you talk about him, he didn't see this as a civil war or these people are going to be British again. He saw them as the enemy. Where you talk about General Howe, Howe was against the war.
He saw Tarleton saw them as being disloyal. He did not see them as patriots. He saw them as disloyal, disloyal to the crown. And you have how they're going to bring in General Burgoyne, all right, and they're going to bring in Cornwallis. Okay, now Burgoyne they have these plans coming into the fore. Okay, these are things that are going to happen, and then of course Cornwallis is going to go down in the south and begin the attempt to try and break out the southern colonies. And Tarleton was in the south, but in the south, the forces led by Tarleton, all right, included a lot of loyalists. These are American loyalists in the south, and you have people that have axes to grind against their neighbors. This is very much a type of mentality of a Hatfield and McCoy kind of, warfare. All right. Our churches burned? The churches burn? Yeah. Why? Because quite frankly, people were hiding weapons and ammunition and military stores in the churches. All right. So you can understand. Now, did they like the Patriot where they locked the people inside and burn the church with all the people inside?
No,
that never happened. Okay.
Yeah, I would agree with that. That was for drama's sake,
Okay. Now, had the British done some stuff like that in the past to the Scots, for example? Well, yeah, they had trapped people in a building and burned it to the ground with all the rebel leaders that they had in Scotland, and they burned it to the ground. All right. Would they do something like that? They would do that in an attempt to, if they thought that they had all the leadership all congregated in a single area, they would attempt to do something like that to decapitate the leadership. They wouldn't do it to a bunch of civilians, children and wives that were in a church praying. That just wouldn't happen.
Don't you think the British would have loved to have a sneak attack on the Continental Congress? Like when they're writing the Declaration, just show up. How you doing, boys?
Yeah, they would have done that. Okay, that is well within. But the British didn't. You got to remember, the British didn't look at them. The British didn't even look at them the same way the Americans is the same way they looked at the Scots. Okay, it's kind of an odd kind of a thing. They didn't have the animus toward the colonists that they had for even the Scottish. Right? It was not the same mentality.
Oh, I know what it is. The Scots wear kilts.
There were
You
plenty.
need to be more open-minded, British.
There were plenty of Americans that had Scottish ancestry to them. You got to remember that. For example, John Paul Jones. Okay, you got to look at some of this stuff. The American revolutionaries were an interesting lot of people. Now, one of the things that we didn't cover was just prior to Washington going on the attack at Trenton and the secret attacks, you have the publication of The American Crisis, all right, by Thomas Paine. Okay, and this is where he talks about the Sunshine Patriot, all right, and so forth. Okay, you also have, and something else we didn't cover, you have the execution of Nathan Hale. You know, the guy who was caught in New York by the British spying for the Americans, and when he is given his last words are immortalized, and I regret only that I have one life to live for my country, and they hung Nathan Hale.
Well, that's what they do to spies. We hung the British spy that was cohorts with Benedict Arnold.
We will talk about that, but that's a little bit different. All right. The thing about this is this sets the stage. Yes, he is hung. The reason he's hung is because Nathan Hale was hung. Okay, rather than being executed by firing squad or executed by by some other means. All right, and being hung at this time frame, we look at it as, okay, it was an execution. He was hung. So what? What's the difference between that and shooting him? There's a huge difference in the mentality of the people back then, in society back then. They looked at being hung as being very dishonorable. All right, they really, there was really an animus towards people for being hung. All right, for hanging, you were treated as if you were nothing more than a common, highwayman or murderer or thief. Hung low.
Well, what's your thoughts? Because in that time period, spying was frowned upon, even though all sides used spies. It still wasn't the gentleman's thing to do. That's why they were executed. What's your stance on spying during wartime?
Spying is to be expected. Do
you think they deserve to have, let's say, the difference between a hanging and a firing squad?
Depends on the situation. Depends on the spy, quite frankly. For example, if you have a spy who, what he's done is he has traveled from the foreign land or from the foreign group, meaning let's say he's a soldier in the British military, okay, and he then sneaks across enemy lines and gets caught. That type of spy, to me, should be treated under the rules of war, all right, and basically shot by firing squad. If you have an American selling out other Americans, right, I have no problem with hanging him as a traitor, especially if he's getting monetary relief and he's basically selling for the cause. As far as I'm concerned, you could freaking hang his ass. You could freaking just then draw and quarter him.
Okay, well, what about the Culper spy ring? The leader of it, which we didn't even find out until I believe the 1930s or 40s, because his notes were found at an estate sale in the back of a painting or something. The guy went to get it reframed and found it. I mean, it's crazy how stuff like that happens. But that's besides the point. What about him? He was writing pro-loyalist newspaper the whole damn time. Meanwhile, spying for Washington.
Okay. And was he caught?
No, we didn't even know about it.
Then he was a successful spy, and he was a patriot, right? The entire time. He was playing a duplicitous game. He was a double agent in that regard.
Yeah, there seems to be something unsavory about spying in general.
Well,
right?
I mean, it's your spying in general is the practice of deceit. Okay, and spies have to practice deceit in order to be spies, right? To some degree, they're going to have to practice deceit. They're going to have to lie. They're going to have to cheat. They may have to steal. Okay, so spies in and of themselves tend to be unsavory characters. Now, there's an additional addendum to that. Many spies also have another role, and that is, whether you like it or not, assassination. These are the backstabbers. These are the weasels. So yeah, you can look upon them, all right, as being unsavory characters, but do you have that same, animus toward, for example, the Navy SEALs?
Well, I have some of the animus towards domestic spying. You know that. We've gotten into arguments about that. So I even see it as unsavory. And I mean, word is, who knows for sure, but people say John Wilkes Booth was a spy. He was at least known to meet in Montreal with the Confederate spies twice. That's probably enough to link him. Did Jefferson Davis order Abraham Lincoln's death? No, I don't think so. And would Washington have ordered Howe's death? I don't think so. But he could have, probably.
Why would he? Okay, the thing is what's the point of ordering someone to die? All right, to assassinate, for example, or decapitate a head. Okay, the thing about doing that from a military perspective is does it give you a tactical advantage, right? Or strategic advantage. There's very few people, very few men and women, all right, that by execution would gain you as an adversary a strategic advantage. It may gain you a tactical advantage, however. For example, if the guy's in the middle of planning an attack on you, or the guy's in the middle of planning a defense, taking him out, right, could lead to victory, right? Could lead to victory on the battlefield. So from a tactical standpoint, it's much clearer. All right. However, that's very difficult to do because the time frame is short. It's very difficult to establish that same thing for a strategic individual. There are times, however, that people are.
Yeah, there are times, and I would challenge you with this. Howe would have been one of those times.
No, they would have just replaced Howe with another general, Burgoyne, or even another Howe coming up later. It wouldn't have made a difference.
I don't know. These generals had years of experience. If you look at, I'm getting a blank here, and I shouldn't be, but the one who surrendered at Yorktown.
Cornwallis?
Yeah, Cornwallis was known to be a military genius. His memoirs alone would have been valuable intel. So taking somebody like that out could have done the Patriot cause very well.
Right, but it would have gained them a tactical advantage, not a strategic advantage. Right, because whether you like it or not, if Cornwallis, let's say Cornwallis had gotten smallpox the day he landed and died, would it have changed the situation any? No. Would the campaigns have gone differently? Probably. All right. But at the same time, would it have really made any difference in the conduct of the battle, in the conduct of the war? Well, it's hard to say. but it's possible, but it's impossible to actually say. You still were dealing with, an adverse correlation of forces in the South, where you had a professional military now that had landed in strength, all right, in the South against what is just militia, and quite frankly, the militia is constantly pushed back, constantly pushed through. Now, overall, would it have changed things? Would it have changed the hinterlands? No, I don't think it would have made a difference at all. I think the British would have done the same thing generally that they did before. They may have lost more battles, all right. The Battle of Cowpens may have been completely different, may have been an absolute slaughter of the British, but you still would have had those same situations take place. So that in and of itself, while it may have allowed a tactical advantage initially, overall, from a strategic standpoint, would it have made a difference? I don't think so.
Well, see, if the Americans would have killed, like, let's say, Burgoyne, Burgoyne wouldn't, then Philadelphia would have never fallen, and the British wouldn't have been holed up there for so long.
Philadelphia would have fallen. All right, Howe would have moved on.
Burgoyne made a strategic mistake trying to hold Philly. He had no reason to hold Philly. The army was in the field.
Howe takes Philadelphia. Burgoyne does not take Philadelphia.
I thought Burgoyne did. He went down there, and that's why Wallace.
Burgoyne comes from the north and is defeated at Saratoga.
Oh, that's right. Okay, yeah, I'm getting that stuff a little bit mixed up. My bad. It's been a long week. What can I do?
I understand that. But no, so taking out Burgoyne would not have gained them anything. It just wouldn't. There still would have been a northern strategy. Whether or not Howe would have been more willing to be in place, it actually could have been to the colonials' detriment to take out Burgoyne from a strategic standpoint.
Well, that's what I was trying to argue, actually, was he made a lot of mistakes, that it would have been better for the crown if we killed him.
Well, it could have been, yeah. But to be honest, the mistakes that he made were understandable considering the context in which they were being given. He was assuming things. He was making assumptions about things, about Howe, all right, that weren't accurate. He was making assumptions that Howe was going to support him, and Howe was not going to support him, was not ready to support him, and therefore the coordination was piss poor.
So one last thing before we wrap up here. I figured we'd wrap up at the 90-minute mark. When it comes to logistics for the Americans, we've kind of discussed that. But the British, they have to travel a whole an entire ocean, right?
They do.
How are they keeping their logistic supply train so active? Is it coming from the Caribbean?
They have thousands of ships. Okay? They are not hampered by the Americans with just a few ships here and there, maybe a total of 100 ships. They have thousands of ships. They have hundreds upon hundreds of warships to call upon.
That's fair. Just a second. William, I'm sure 4th grade history class was more entertaining. You had dinosaurs outside your windows.
All right, the British are not. You got to remember, they've got an entire empire to draw from. All right, and they have the shipping might to draw from it. Okay, they have ships of the line in the hundreds. Okay, ships of the line being the bigger ships. All right, with hundreds of cannon. The Americans don't have that. Okay, the Americans they don't have the industrial might to produce the cannons. This is something else that should be noted.
Well, no, and even when we get a supply train from France, the fact remains, I think they sent a couple shiploads of rifles with the wrong fucking ammo or some shit. Like, the French can't get anything right.
there is an initial issue with the shipping of ammunition and supplies. The Americans are piss poorly supplied. One of the problems that the French have, of course, is to them, if you got a gun, you got a gun. But the Americans don't have the lead. This is something that's important. They don't have the lead, and they don't have the tools, all right, to build balls for the size of the French guns. All right, this becomes a problem. All right, so from their perspective, you ship us a lot of guns that are just basically iron rods. We must use them as clubs. All right, because we don't have the ability to manage them to utilize these guns. All right, something as simple as, well, you just got to everyone's got shot. Everyone has lead shot. Well, no, not everyone has lead. All right. You see it in the Patriot, right, where the character by
Mel Gibson.
Mel Gibson's character is melting down the little toy soldiers from his son. Now they make it look like, okay, the reason he's doing that is because he's trying to punish the British for killing his son, and and that's a great theatrical kind of context. But the reality was, you had to get lead. You needed lead, and they were stripping the countryside of lead in order to try and fight. And okay, so he has his little tool that makes the nice little round ball. Well, if your steel tool is the wrong size for the ball, it doesn't do you a hell of a lot of good now, does it?
Yeah, absolutely. And the fact remains, though, or no, actually, this is what I wanted to say. I know what we could have used those French rifles for. Hand them to the guys guarding the POW camp. The POWs don't know they're empty, right?
Well, okay, they may not initially know that they're empty, but over time they're going to know.
That's fair. And then you're screwed. Where do you think we're gonna head to next week? Because now I do think the winter, there's nothing much else that happens in the first winter of the war.
Well, I think the first thing that we should probably talk about is during this time frame, you're going to talk about the campaign efforts to rebuild the army. We're going to have to talk about Burgoyne's plan. All right, as he moves forward, you're going to have to talk about obviously, Betsy Ross. I guess we might as well do Betsy Ross. All right, and the whole flag controversy. All right, in the 13 colonies and the Great flag.
There's a controversy about that now.
There's always controversy about everything when you think about it, right? So,
on a side note, all right, Biden gave Trump the coup, right? There, I said it.
No, I don't think Biden gave Trump the coup. Good grief!
Oh, so it was Chris. Yeah, on to you, Wallace.
That what do you call it? How do I put this? Conspiracy theory is well and truly roaming around. I think it's ridiculous, right? But I can't deny that it's not taking place.
You doing your morning show tomorrow? Or no, I watched your show earlier. You're doing it in the afternoon, right?
It'll probably be in the afternoon. An afternoon.
All right. Check that out tomorrow, guys. And I don't know. Still trying to get into a place, so it's kind of touch and go during the week for the streams. Hopefully, I'll get a red eye stream out for you guys. Good night. Good luck, and see you next week for the history show.